Trish. Now, 4 people have died in the UK and Ireland as Storm Isha's 100-mile-per-hour winds tore down trees, caused transport chaos and left hundreds of thousands without power. Some areas in the UK experienced the strongest winds they've seen for 2 decades, and another named storm is on the way. Storm Jocelyn is due to blast the UK and Ireland with more strong winds and heavy rain tomorrow. Our Scotland correspondent, Catherine Sampson, has this.
It tore across the country in the early hours of this morning. Storm Isha lashed coastlines and communities from Cornwall to Cumbria to here in Cumbernauld, where the winds were strong enough to rip off this roof.
It was just a loud bang, a lot of noise, a lot of rumbling. You can hear the roof like moving about, and you can see it flying off, and debris was just coming through into the posts, out the windows.
Trees were uprooted, thousands of homes were left without power. As the clean-up operation got underway, we learned the storm had also claimed lives. On this road in Grangemouth, an 84-year-old man died after a car he was a passenger in crashed into a fallen tree. 3 other people lost their lives after crashes in Northern Ireland and Ireland. On the railways, disruption stretched beyond the morning rush hour.
Here in Scotland, trains were cancelled at 7 p.m. yesterday evening at Glasgow Central. People have been queuing in the rain this morning, waiting for checks to be carried out for the first services to start running again. How long have you been waiting for?
A couple of hours.
A couple of hours in the rain?
Yep.
Please be moving then.
Oh, delighted. Thank you very much.
I did try and get home last night and had to come back again. Oh gosh, so glad to be off now finally. Hopefully, yes, thank you.
Coming in a little bit hotter than normal, I think.
And it wasn't any smoother in the air. Bumpy landings for many of those who did make it to their intended destinations. But dozens of flights were also cancelled or diverted. Passengers trying to travel from Tenerife to Edinburgh were taken by their pilot to Germany instead for a safer landing.
At points you were thinking, God, this is going to be, I didn't think it was going to be this rough, you know, and the way it was doing things that you just didn't expect it to do, you know, it seemed to almost turn corners in the air, you know, and then they came on and told us we were going to go to Cologne in Germany, and that's where we landed at 1 o'clock this morning, instead of 11 o'clock in Edinburgh.
At Edinburgh Airport, a lone suitcase was filmed, making its own travel arrangements on the runway. A rare, lighter moment in what was a worrying night for many. And now focus shifts to the 10th named storm in 5 months. Jocelyn is on the way tomorrow. Forecast to be a step down from Storm Isha in terms of intensity, it will still heap more misery on communities and commuters, especially in Scotland, where all train services will be suspended again tomorrow evening and into Wednesday's rush hour.
Catherine Sampson. Let's speak now to Professor Lizzie Kendon, who is a scientist at the Met Office. Lizzie, Isha was the 9th named storm. Jocelyn would be the 10th named storm in this season. Last year we only got 2. Is there anything to read into that at all?
So there have been a lot of named storms recently. In terms of whether there's any trends here, I think it's very difficult to say at this stage. We have only been naming storms actually since 2015, so it's hard at this stage to identify any underlying trends. I think we can say though that the UK climate is changing. There is definitely evidence that it's changing, both in the context of temperature records and very heavy rainfall. So I guess the sort of impacts we've been seeing with the recent storms is kind of an indication of the sort of changes that we might expect in the future.
You mentioned very heavy rainfall. We saw those devastating floods recently. I'm going to look at a graph now that shows, if you go back, I think, to the 1840s, the dotted line on this graph will show our viewers a trend that is getting wetter and wetter every winter. Why is that?
So I think, firstly, what this graphic you're showing here very nicely demonstrates is the huge variability that we're seeing from year to year. But you're absolutely right, there is an underlying trend in rainfall, and we're getting more rainfall, more heavy rainfall, and it is essentially essentially due to the fact that our climate is warming. So as the climate warms, the atmosphere is able to hold more moisture, and the first order effect of that is that we see a greater increase in the intensity of rainfall. In terms of flooding though, whether rainfall directly translates to flooding is very complicated. It's not simply as straightforward of how the rainfall is changing, it's also the subtlety of how much rainfall has fallen in the past, so whether the catchment itself is very wet. It's due to the characteristics and the management of that catchment. And one of the things that we are finding increasingly in the newest research is that there may well be changes in the kind of clustering events through time. So we may get a succession of very extreme events, very heavy rainfall, which obviously exacerbates the impacts. And that's something we're kind of seeing here with the recent storms where, you know, the next storm that we're getting is coming when people are still very much cleaning up from the last storm, and so they're much more potentially vulnerable to the impacts of the next storm coming along the way.
And your expertise, isn't it, Professor Kendon, is very long-term forecasts. We're talking maybe 50, 60 years. And what are you finding then about how climate change impacts the weather in the long term?
So we've been running the weather forecast mode that we're all familiar with, but in climate change, so running right out to the end of the century, so understanding how our weather patterns are going to evolve through time from now right out to 2080. And what we can see is that, you know, if we look at something like record-breaking events, for example, which captures the public attention, then we do see those sort of occurrences of those events expected to increase in the future. You know, the sort of rainfall that can lead to maybe flash flooding, maybe four times more frequent by the end of the century if we follow a high emission scenario. So these are really big changes in the kind of characteristics of the type of rainfall we may get. So this is talking about, you know, maybe short duration rainfall, which is important for flash flooding, longer duration, which is important for maybe more rivers overtopping and flooding in low-lying areas. And also there's changes due to sea level rise and propensity for coastal flooding. So it's coming at us from many different directions. And what's really important, I think, to get across is that what we've observed in the past isn't an indication of what's to come.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Lizzie Kendon, Professor Kendon, thank you so much for speaking with us. Thank you. We'll have a full forecast at the end of the programme with our weather presenter, Liam.